Wow, knight to g4? What is this?
That's when you know a move is very special. When you've got a panel of grandmasters, international masters, and they see the move played on the board and still can't work out the concept behind it for quite some time. And there's a small detail behind this move which makes it even more special. So this is Magnus Carlsen with white, playing Jan Nepomniachtchi. It's the semi-finals of the AI Cup, a Champions Chess Tour event, and this is game 3, the first 2 games drawn. Let's check this one out. So Magnus goes e4, e5 on the board. Now we're going to build to this climax, but first we have to appreciate how the game builds. We start with this Petrov, Russian defense, symmetrical, boring, right? Well, it develops like a fine wine. It needs to age over time. Now, why does this have such a reputation for being boring? Well, look at the pawn structure. Symmetrical, solid. It's a draw weapon. But what does Magnus do? Well, he tries to probe. So we get all of these standard opening moves, very theoretical. Black trying to maintain this knight on e4, but now we get the first change in the position, a subtle change of pawn structure, some liquidation of pieces, and after knight d7 developing, we reach this position here where with queen b3, white just starts probing against this pawn using the half open file. So queen c7 covers that pawn, adds some pressure down here. We get c4, Magnus taking this central space now. These are called hanging pawns. They give you that nice control, but they can become weak. Nepo goes rook fe8, challenges that open file, and developing this bishop looks natural to connect the rooks, but here we see pawn g3. So it stops anything like bishop takes here after knight recaptures, and Magnus is obviously then preparing to maneuver that knight if Nepo captures the rook. So he just holds off. He goes pawn b6, natural looking move. Now we see bishop b2. Magnus coming to the long diagonal, and you can play c5 here, but it's not such a good move because after d5, white's got a strong passed pawn, still good control of e5, and white's slightly better. So Nepo holds off. He drops back this bishop, just a solid prophylactic move, covering g7, doesn't harm his position, and now a4, Magnus begins the probe, looking to run this pawn down and induce a weakness on b6. So a6 comes in response. Nepo wants to meet a5 with b5, and we do see it later on. So king g2 played, king safety first. h6 from Nepo, takes g5 from the knight. We can see how that could get dangerous with the queen, you know, constant prophylactic chess, gives the king some luft, and now takes on e8 was played. What's this all about? Ceding the open file. Well, Magnus now goes bishop to c1, re-maneuvering to f4, new diagonal. I mean, what a grandmasterly move. And although he ceded this file, there isn't actually any entry points right now. Sorry, you can enter to e2. I never actually analysed that variation, but I'm guessing you can get kicked away, maybe queen d3 coming. This is better for white. And in fact, bishop d6 here takes, queen recaptures, and this pawn could get weak if the knight ever moves. So Nepo didn't invade with the rook. He went rook b8, covered the weak b pawn, and now queen c2 just comes off the line of that rook, but it did give Nepo an opportunity here to try and liquidate, and it comes with the move c5. Now this looks bad because of this d5 problem, and you get the connected passed pawn, but b5 is the counter shot, and you're breaking up those white pawns due to the rook standing behind. This is a sample line, and black is successful at breaking up these pawns. You can even recapture this one first rather than this. Should be a dead equal game. But Nepo misses the shot. He goes rook to e8, and now a5 from Magnus. He allows this move. You do not want to take here. Shatter the pawn structure. Allow white to go c5 and set up a huge bind with bishop f4 coming. So b5 was played, but now captures. You can't recapture with the c pawn, of course. Your queen hangs. So the a pawn captures, but now Magnus After this exchange, he's got the running a pawn. Nepo comes to stop it, and a7. Is that pawn overextended? Because queen c7 now attacks it twice. There's no queen c5. The knight covers the square, but brilliant foresight now from Magnus. He goes rook to a6, probing against this pawn, saying, yes, you can take here, but then I'll take here with my rook. Your queen moves away. I land this deadly check. You can't step here with the king because of my queen. So knight blocks, queen c5, queen e7 to cover the piece, and this pawn drops. And white's a clean pawn ahead, and it's a dangerous passed pawn. So these are some of the problems that Magnus is setting his opponent. Now c5, apparently best move, and you can technically liquidate, but it allows queen e4. You would hit the rook. You threaten checks. Very nasty. So understandably, Nepo drops his knight back here into f8, covering checks, re-maneuvering, but now queen c5 because the knight's left the square. You could have immediately taken there, by the way, but it starts to liquidate. White does come out a pawn ahead, but Magnus prefers his chances here, where he invites this knight into e6 with tempo. What's his plan? Is it to take and do the same variation, but this time the black knight's improved? Well, no, he's got this tricky move up his sleeve. He goes rook takes on c6, because if black captures the queen, white takes this one, and you defend this pawn, and after the knight moves, there's rook b7, this is coming. The king can move, but it's still terrible. Then this pawn drops, completely winning. So you can't take this queen. This one's attacked. So Nepo sidesteps, but now queen b6. Magnus probing away once again. So Nepo finally takes that pawn. It can be won. He restores the material balance, but now d5. Magnus just a step ahead in applying the pressure, and Nepo plays in the wrong manner, but it's really not easy. He should take off the queens according to the engine. This gives him his best chance, then going knight c5, excuse me, drops the b pawn, but maneuvers the knight into this blockading square, and he has to try and grovel on from here. But what Nepo does is immediately maneuver this knight. But now Magnus gets to keep the queens on the board, and this is extra dangerous, and Nepo immediately goes wrong. So he should go knight to g6. He goes knight d7, but now after rook c8 check, king h7, you can go queen c2 check, and there's no knight blocking that square. So big problems now, because after g6, there's queen c3. What an expert probing move, threatening checkmate. And if you go pawn f6, things start to get really ugly, opening up the 7th. You can already go d6, threaten rook c7, hitting the queen. The knight would be pinned, then this pawn could drop by the queen. All sorts of problems. So Nepo goes knight to f6, tricky tactical move, because if white takes that knight, then black takes the rook and is better. So that wasn't played, but Magnus goes d6. Again, setting up these problems. And if you go king g7, trying to cover this f pawn, well, still rook c7 comes, the queen moves, then there's d7 because the knight is pinned. Huge pressure. So Nepo, he goes for b4, trying to randomize the position, counterattack the white queen, but it invites the queen to invade onto the 7th, and just another expert move by Magnus. He's finding all the top moves. If the queen captures, rook takes back, and you're hitting this one and the pawn. If you take, the pawn's going through, unstoppable, so the rook would have to move away, a5 or something, but then you take with check, the king moves, the knight drops. So many problems. So Nepo, he plays g5, because, by the way, another threat, if you'd gone king g7, was queen d8, then setting up these nasty checkmating ideas. So this gives the king a square, but now queen takes, rook recaptures, and rook c7. You hit this one, still you can't take, or the pawn's going through. The rook has to give ground, but now we get takes with check. And this next sequence and combination of moves is just exceptional. So you want to land knight e5 check here, protecting the rook, driving the king up the board, but the rook would take that piece. So Magnus first goes pawn d7, doesn't even move this rook, which is attacked. Now, if the knight takes, you simply win a piece, of course. If the king takes the rook, you make a queen. So Nepo's forced to go rook d5, come behind the pawn, and now knight e5 check comes because the rook cannot take or the pawn goes through. So the king is driven up the board, and now this is where Magnus unleashes a GOAT endgame move so good that even when he plays it, the guys in the studio just can't figure out what is going on here.
Wow, knight to g4? What is this? King takes knight now. I guess he wants to meet by rook takes.
6, and there's a checkmate.
Yeah, there's a checkmate.
Wow.
Lovely.
Rook takes pawn now looks like the most natural move.
Yeah.
Took us a while, but look at this. The black king finally caught. Magnus does know his checkmates, everyone.
Beautiful.
And the small detail that makes this move so incredible, look at Magnus's clock time. 2 minutes 42 seconds. He gets 3 seconds back a move. He plays knight g4 and he's on 2 minutes 44. So he took a second to play this move and execute the tactic. I mean, even though he would have seen this from afar, still just beautiful how he smashes it out, trusts his intuition. So the king takes that knight. Now we get rook takes on f6, and because of the problem with the checkmate coming using either of these pawns, if you take here, well, now Nepo goes for king to h5, trying to run away, but pawn h3 anyway, and Nepo resigns the game. You cannot stop this mate from coming on the board, and then this one here, unless you go g4, but then there's the brilliant move to finish the game. Do pause if you want to try and find that one. So there's rook f5, check, distracting this rook. Then you can even flick in a check, king takes, you make the queen, and this is a completely lost endgame. So the final position was this. Now Nepo fought back in the final game, almost won it, but couldn't quite complete the endgame of queen against rook. So Magnus held on. He goes through to the finals where he'll play MVL. I hope you enjoyed this game. Do hit subscribe to never miss a future video, and see another epic game of chess, check out the video on screen. Thanks very much for watching, and see you soon.